Good morning, everyone, and welcome to UN City. Thank you for joining us, and sorry about the slight delay. We are about to get started. Obviously, you're here to listen to the end of mission statement by the Special Rapporteur on the rights of indigenous people. And just to let you know, the run-of show is one where we will begin by asking Jens Vandel, who's the Undersecretary General and Acting Executive Director of UNOPS, do a welcome address. And then the Special Rapporteur will deliver his remarks, and then we'll allow for questions. If you're joining us online, please state your questions in the chat. I'm looking at you in the room, it doesn't apply to you, but if you are online, please state your questions in the chat. We are also recording the session, so if you need it subsequently, we can provide that. So without further ado, Jens, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. Thanks for being here for this press conference. As mentioned, I'm Jens Vandel. I run UNOPS, and I'm also the head of the country team here in Denmark. So it's in that capacity that I open this. As you know, Mr. Cali Tzay is the UN Special Rapporteur on Rights of the Indigenous People. And he's just completed an official visit to Denmark and to Greenland that had lasted from 1st through 10th February. And today, I understand, you will be presenting the preliminary findings of your visit. I just want to say that the people of Greenland have been pursuing independence in a very profound sense of the word for many years. And what is central here is that people all over the world have the capability and the possibility to live in a society where they can choose the life that they value. And this is, in my view, deeply in line with the values of the United Nations. So I think I speak for all of us here today when I say we really look forward to hearing your reflections on your visit. But before I hand over to you, just allow me to briefly introduce Mr. Tzay and his role. The Special Rapporteur is an independent expert appointed by the United Nations Human Rights Council in 2020. The Rapporteur have a global mandate to promote the respect, the protection and fulfillment of all human rights for indigenous people worldwide. During his visit, Mr. Tzay covered a diverse range of issues affecting indigenous people in Denmark and in Greenland. He visited Copenhagen, Nuuk, Sisimiut. He met with government officials, indigenous organizations, civil society, academics, and UN representatives. And he visited indigenous communities to discuss their priorities and concerns. Mr. Cali Tzay himself is a Maya Cacique from Guatemala. He has extensive experience in defending the rights of indigenous peoples in Guatemala and at the United Nations and at the Organization of American States, OAS. So without further ado, let me hand it over to you, Mr. Tzay, for your briefing. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, especially to the UN system here in Denmark for organizing this press conference. And in my capacity as the United Nations Special Rapporteur on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, I am pleased to share with you my preliminary observation at the end of the official visit to Denmark and Kalalit, Nunat, Greenland, that took place from the 1st to the 10th of of February 2023. I would like to thank the government of Denmark and Greenland for their invitation and for their openness and cooperation with my mandate before and during my visit. The purpose of my visit was to understand, in the spirit of mutual cooperation and constructive dialogue, how Denmark and Greenland implement the rights of indigenous peoples in order to identify good practices and possible obstacles and to present concrete recommendations aimed at overcoming the observed challenges. Let me start by thanking the government of Denmark and Greenland for their cooperation with my mandate. And as I said, I had the opportunity to meet the Danish Minister of Foreign Affairs and the Greenlandic Minister for Industry, Trade, Foreign Affairs and Climate, representative of various government institutions in both countries, working on the range of human rights issues. Parliamentarians, judges, law enforcement personnel, as well as to visit indigenous peoples and their communities and to meet various civil society representatives. In Denmark, I met the State Secretary for Foreign Affairs, various representatives from the Prime Minister's office, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Defense, Ministry of Social Affairs, Housing and Senior Citizens, Ministry of Interior and Health, Ministry of Children and Education, Minister of Digital Government and Gender Equality, Minister of Higher Education and Science, Minister of Climate, Energy and Utilities, Ministry of Environment, Ministry of Industry, Business and Financial Affairs, the head of the Greenland representation in Copenhagen, and members of the Parliament. In Greenland, I met with the government ministries related to gender equality, social affairs, children, youth, family, health, education and culture, housing, justice, fisheries and hunting, mineral resources, energy, climate, environment, foreign affairs, business, trade, infrastructure and housing, members of Inatia Sartut of the Parliament, and the Constitutional Commission, the High Commissioner of Greenland, the Prisons and Probation Service in Greenland, Greenland Police, municipality authorities, as well as the High Court and the District Court. It has been a very interesting and enriching experience during which I learned a lot from all the relevant stakeholders and right holders. I would also like to express my deep gratitude to all of them for their extensive cooperation and support throughout the visit. I would like to emphasize the unique implementation model of the right to self-determination of indigenous peoples by Greenland and Denmark, reflected in the self-governance of Greenland, which I indeed welcome. Since 2009, the Act on Greenland's self-government has given the possibility of self-governance between most areas except, for example, foreign, defense, security policies. Following the Home Rule Act and the Self-Government Act, a substantial part of the areas affecting the daily lives of Greenlandic citizens is under the authority of Greenland. In this regard, I'm looking with interest into the constitutional discussion in Greenland and their further development. Nevertheless, some areas still remain under the jurisdiction of Denmark, such as administration of justice. I would like to welcome the willingness and readiness of the government of Denmark to embrace Greenland's self-determination, including consulting closely with Greenland on the areas of Denmark's responsibilities, such as foreign, defense and security policy, and justice matters. I encourage the government of Denmark to continue seeking the free, prior, and informed consent of Greenland for all the matters concerning, including areas under Danish governance. Despite significant progress during my visit, I observed that Inuit people still face barriers to fully enjoying their rights. It has been reported to me that there are about 17,000 Inuit people living in Denmark. As they have Danish citizens, they formally enjoy the same basic rights as Danish-born citizens. The Danish government asserts that the welfare state is based on equal access. However, in practice, Inuit people face significant administrative and institutional obstacles, as well as racism and racial discrimination, which prevents them from enjoying their rights on equal footing and often leaves them feeling marginalized and excluded. Inuit people in Denmark told me they feel like invisible ghosts, as they have nowhere to turn to for advice and assistance. While the Greenland government has assumed responsibility under the earlier Home Rule Act for the fields of education, health service, labor and housing support and social affairs, in practice, many Inuit people seek education and health care in Denmark. Specialized medical care assistance for persons with disabilities and tertiary education programs remain limited in Greenland. For example, in order to study medicine or engineering, one must do so in other countries, including Denmark, as there are no such degrees in Greenland. In Denmark, the share of people in homelessness with an Inuit background is significantly higher than it is among people in homelessness with a Danish background. However, no precise data is available. Nor there are precise statistics of the number of Inuit children living in Denmark and whether they receive education in their mother tongue. Such education is only obligatory if there are 12 children in the municipality. And Inuit people told me that in practice their children are denied mother tongue education. I was particularly appalled by the testimony of Inuit women that reported being subject to IUD by Danish healthcare providers without their knowledge or consent, some as young as 12 years old. Most of the cases are reported to have taken place in the 60s and 1970s. Nevertheless, there have been more recent cases reported to me as well. The women affected by the COIL campaign are traumatized till today, and they seek justice for the pain and suffering imposed on them against their free, prior, and informed consent. The campaign dramatically dropped the birth rate of Inuit women, leading to a drastic change in the composition of the Inuit society. Indigenous women suffer severe physical pain and devastating health consequences, including infertility. Even if I welcome the establishment of the 2-year independent investigation aimed to looking at the period 1966 to 1991, I recall upon the government of Denmark and Greenland to extend the scope of the inquiry into more recent cases and including the oral testimony of Inuit women as part of the investigation process. During my visit to Denmark, I was dismayed by the testimonies of the suffering of Inuit women living in Denmark, whose children have been taken away from them without their knowledge and consent and placed in Danish foster families. Research presented in 2022 revealed that Inuit children in Denmark are 7 times more likely than Danish children to be placed in out-of-home care away from their parents. While the best interest of the child provides legitimate ground to remove some children, information indicates that serious cultural biases exist in assessing Inuit parenting. I am particularly concerned that physicometric tests are often based on alleged arbitrary criteria and do not comply with Inuit culture and identity. The language barrier is another challenge. Such tests are performed in a language Inuit mothers often do not understand, and they are often forced to sign documents without understanding the content. Furthermore, prejudice about Inuit people have resulted in social workers entering unconfirmed assumptions about abuse and violence in case files. Parents told me that they were coerced into signing agreement to hand over their children to foster care and of their case files being withheld from them. The majority of the Inuit children removed are placed in Danish family, which often result in Greenlandic Inuit children permanently losing their language, culture, identity, and family ties, and make it next to impossible for them to return to Greenland. I wish to recall that irrespective of whether Greenlandic Inuit children are in Greenland or in Denmark, they retain their right as an indigenous people under the ILO Convention 169 and the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and consequently should be ensured support to retain their culture, language, and identity. I call on Denmark to urgently review the procedures for out-of-home care assessment of Inuit children, to address structural prejudice between social authorities by strengthening training for staff, and to strengthen interaction with the Inuit community and organizations in order to establish and support more Greenlandic foster families. I call upon the government of Denmark and of Greenland to address the root causes of the negative impact of the legacies of colonialism that translate today into structural and systematic racial discrimination against Inuit people both in Denmark and Greenland. In this regard, I welcome the creation of an impartial investigation of the historical relationship between Denmark and Greenland from World War II until today. I also take note of the recognition of the past injustice by Denmark and the steps taken to address them. However, further effective, culturally appropriate and concrete measures are needed, such as the inclusion of Inuit language, culture, and history in the curriculum of the school in Denmark and Greenland. An independent, impartial, and effective investigation into past injustice. In this regard, I welcome that Danish authorities decide to include Inuit culture and history in the general school curricula for all in Denmark as key measure to address past injustice and create a more inclusive society. Considering that Denmark is a pioneer in promoting and advising indigenous people's rights at the international and regional levels that I indeed welcome, I would like to call upon the government to fully embrace this commitment at the domestic level as well. For this reason, I call upon the government of Denmark to give full implementation at the domestic level to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and ILO Convention 169 that Denmark ratified in 1996. During my visit to Greenland, I had the opportunity to familiarize myself closely with the richness of Inuit culture. I was particularly impressed by learning about the diverse expression of the Inuit culture in the north, the east, and the south of Greenland, which include a large variety of languages, dialects, and the scientific and technical knowledge of hunting and fishing. As this mandate has expressed on other occasions, I want to reiterate that Greenland's extensive self-government is an inspiring example of the implementation of indigenous self-government and a peaceful process toward self-determination for many indigenous peoples worldwide. I welcome the work of the Constitutional Commission of Greenland in charge of the preparing a draft constitution. I want to encourage the government of Greenland to promote a wide-reaching, inclusive, and meaningful consultation with the full participation of Inuit people in this process. I particularly encourage the government of Greenland to implement the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples based on the principle of self-identification. Indigenous peoples suffer disproportionately from loss of biological diversity and environment degradation in Greenland. Inuit people are accurately aware of climate change, diverse human rights, cultural health, and social and economical impact. The knowledge, adaptation, mitigation, strategies, and management practices of Inuit people are critical to addressing the challenges they face. I commend the government of Greenland for elaborating the conceptualization of protected areas to recognize the role of Inuit people in biodiversity conservation and its inextricable link with culture. I was pleased to learn that Greenland has planned to increase the production of renewable energy, eventually leading to 90% of the country's electricity production to be green energy, as well as about the moratorium on uranium extraction. I welcome Greenland's decision to resume discussion to join Paris Agreement. I remained preoccupied with the adverse environmental and social effects of military activities carried out in Greenland without the free, prior, and informed consent of Inuit people. I welcome the 2018 agreement between the government of Denmark and Greenland for the removal and cleanup of military waste. However, I am concerned that after 70 years, the Inuit people who live in Thule area have not obtained fair and just compensation for the relocation and consequent loss of ancestral land and resources in accordance with the international human rights standard relating to the rights of indigenous peoples. With its plan on expansion of mining activities as well as tourism and infrastructure, I call upon the government of Greenland to consult with Inuit people affected by these projects, in particular the indigenous communities such as hunters and fishers, whose traditional livelihood will be impacted by such projects. I would like to express concern for the lack of established mechanisms to implement the Inuit people's right to free, prior, and informed consent, including in the case of granting of tourism concession, implementation of business projects, and adoption of legislative and administrative acts. It's particularly worrying that some municipalities have granted tourism concession in Inuit traditional fishing areas without obtaining the free, prior, and informed consent of the Inuit people. The Greenlandic society still faces numerous challenges. I was informed that 1/4 of the Greenlandic population is under 18 years old, and that some of the main barriers Inuit children face related to poverty and lack of adequate housing, appropriate quality education, and scarce mental health support. Around 20% of children are estimated to have been exposed to violence and sexual abuse. Greenland has one of the highest suicide rates in the world. Today, even younger people commit suicide than before, some as young as 12 years old. I am encouraged the Greenlandic government has strengthened measures in favor of children's rights. I welcome the development of an action plan for compliance with the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child 2023-2030, and encourage particular attention to be paid to the need for mental health professionals across the country. I urge the government to assign adequate resources for its implementation, especially at the municipality level, and to ensure that national action plan is put in place through collaboration with civil society and other relevant stakeholders. One of the key challenges faced during my visit to Greenland is the situation that persons with disability face. Surveys indicate that nearly 1/5 of the population identifies as having a disability. I note with appreciation that Greenland is taking measures to address the acute challenge faced by persons with disabilities, including accessibility issues, as well as stigma and discrimination against them. In this regard, I would like to note the role of a spokesperson institution for persons with disabilities. The 2020 legislation on support for persons with disability and a draft disability action plan, which is currently being elaborated. However, major challenges remain in order for persons with disability to be able to enjoy their rights, including multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, lack of access to education, and the absence of legal protection against discrimination in Greenland. I was concerned to learn about instances of persons with disability who were unable to receive the education, who face sexual violence, and who will wish to work part-time but are sent to institutions for elderly, even young people, due to lack of other options. I am deeply concerned about the high level of gender inequality in Greenland, including inequality in income, gender stereotypes, and mental, physical, and sexual violence against women and girls. I was also moved to hear stories of discrimination and stigma against Inuit, LGBTI, and gender-diverse persons that forced them to move to Denmark, where they continue facing discrimination due to their Inuit identity. I was told that the lack of housing results in overcrowded living conditions, and at times four families live together in homes intended for only one family. I also note as positive the announcement in January 2023 of a new government strategy for homeless people. In this regard, I recommend the government to ensure a holistic approach in its implementation, taking into account interlinkage with social services, health, education, and employment, and that adequate resources be assigned, as well as indicators defined to evaluate its effectiveness. I am also concerned that a large amount of settlements do not have access to water and sanitation in houses, which is particularly challenging for persons with disabilities. I would like to highlight the challenge faced particularly in the area of healthcare and access to justice with regard to the lack of professional personnel and relevant education and training available in Greenland. The judicial system falls under the jurisdiction of Denmark and faces great challenges, including reaching geographical remote settlements and lack of personnel and resources, including for digitalization and information and communication technology. I welcome that Greenland's criminal system is founded on reintegration rather than punishment system, with a prevalence of open prisons. However, I am concerned about the high rate of incarceration and lengthy procedures of criminal cases. In addition, inmates with particular psychiatric needs are referred to a closed forensic psychiatric ward in Denmark. During the visit, I noted that access to justice and due process for Inuit people are hindered by barriers in appealing the administrative decisions of government bodies due to the unclear distribution of competencies and administrative structure. This prevents Inuit people from fully enjoying their fundamental rights. I am particularly worried about the number of underreported sexual abuse cases of children and adolescents, and domestic violence against women and girls. I note the effort taken by Greenland police to fight against these crimes, such as establishing a dedicated Inuit on sexual abuse. However, culturally appropriated, effective and holistic action are needed to eradicate the root causes of the crimes. Finally, I would like to stress the education that education is critical in addressing many of the challenges Greenland face. For this reason, I would like to highlight the good practice such as the Nun Rasmussen High School in Sisimiut, which embrace a student-centered approach and the teaching of Inuit culture, and the establishment of the legal degree in University of Greenland. I encourage the government of Greenland to increase this education initiative and programs. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate my appreciation to the government of Denmark and Greenland for the invitation and full cooperation extended to me, and for allowing me to conduct my visit freely and independently. I would also like to express my appreciation to the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights for their support in ensuring the success of the visit, as well as UNICEF Greenland and UN Copenhagen for their support extended to the visit. Finally, I offer my deep gratitude to the Inuit people who have welcomed me to their country, and to all those who travel long distance to share their stories and concern with me. I am inspired by their strength and determination to continue defending their rights and seeking justice. Today, I present to all of you some of the pressing issues highlighted during the visit. There are many other issues worth careful attention, and I am looking forward to our continuous cooperation and meaningful dialogue in the finalization of the full report of the visit, including the recommendation addressed to tackling the identified challenges. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you to the Special Rapporteur. I would now open up for questions, reminding those of you in the room that there will be an option of an individual interview after this session. But please, questions in the room, and those of you joining us online, if you could post your questions in the chat, we will weave those in. So the floor is open. And we have mics, making sure that everybody online can hear what we're saying. Hasefal, please.
I think it's a pity that I understand there are issues that could be improved in Greenland and the Inuit population, but I think it's very much a pity that you focus so much on negative things. I think the people of Greenland are very proud and very great people. It's not a suffering poor people. And then I have a question to you. Who has the responsibility? Is it the people themselves, or is it the Greenland government, or is it the Danish government? but I don't think it's realistic to leave the impression that it's a poor, suffering people. They are a great, powerful people with respect.
Special Rapporteur, you want to come in on that answer?
You are right on your appreciation on the issue that Inuit people are very rich and proud of their culture. And that's why in my final report, I will deeply put those aspects of the Inuit culture. I will analyze that in my report and define it. That's why it said, define it that I have in my visit is what I am reflecting in this notes in this moment. Of course, I have a lot of information, and I have been not give all the negative information in this because there are a lot. There are more on that. But it's true that it's a proud people. Their culture is a very highly appreciated, and I think that that is something that is going to be reflected in the final report.
Thank you. Other questions? And if I can ask you to state your affiliation when you ask your questions? Anyone? I don't see any questions online. There's one there.
There's a question here, Fleming.
Yeah, please.
Mira from the organization NALIC. And I'm just wondering whether you have included any perspectives on the Danish population in Greenland and their role in some of the obstacles that you were just stating, as opposed to just, looking at the Inuit people as inhabitants of Greenland, because there's like a huge Danish population there that have a lot of, leading positions and a lot of responsibility. So have you thought about that as well?
My mandate is very clear, and it's about indigenous peoples. So I think that that is something that another special rapporteur or another mandate has to come to Denmark and Greenland to analyze that issue. My mandate, as I said, is only about indigenous people and their situation of their human rights that is established in the Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights of the United Nations and the ILO Convention. I think that what I stated, that is the situation of human rights of the Inuit people is the result of colonization, is something that has implicit saying what has been taking place in Greenland.
Thank you. And we have a question online. I'll read it out loud. It's from Thomas Vyrum of Samitsiak. Hi, can you elaborate on how people should identify themselves as Inuit and get protection under ILO 169 with a registry, and according to which parameters?
I cannot elaborate on that. It's very clear what the ILO Convention said is self-identification. And I am on the position that I support self-identification.
Thank you. That's clear. Any other questions in the room or online? Doesn't seem to be the case. So we will conclude the session and ask those of you interested in. Did you have a question? Yeah, so for individual interviews, we'll segue into that. But thank you so much for coming out. Thank you, Special Rapporteur, for delivering your end of mission statement. Thank you, Jens, also for joining us this morning. And please, for those of you who need an individual interview, if you can stick around, we will order a sequence for that as well. Yeah, thank you.